How are you, Zach?
Good. I'm good. I'm not using headphones. Is that okay?
That's totally fine. Hey, Grace.
Hi, guys. I'm trying to figure out my lighting.
Guys, I'm very excited about this.
What fun. Been so long.
Do you think we still have the chemistry?
I think we do. Wait.
Juan, you can't buy the chemistry we have, the three of us.
All right, so let's start. From Columbia Journalism School in New York City, this is Juan Manuel Benítez Wants to Know. Welcome to Season 2 of this podcast, a special season premiere bringing together the original team of the award-winning NY1 Off-Topic on Politics podcast, where Grace Rauh, Zack Fink, and I try to debate local politics in a serious but fun way, from congestion pricing to Amazon in New York City and every local election. Since we all left NY1, we've gone in very different directions. Grace is now the executive director of Citizens Union, one of New York's oldest good government organizations. Zack left journalism entirely and is now director of external affairs at Davidoff, and Citron, working in government relations and hosting the Lobbying Insider podcast. And I'm here at Columbia teaching the next generation of local journalists. So Grace, Zack, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
So fun to be here. Thank you, Juan.
And welcome back, Grace. So before we jump in, I want to tell our listeners and viewers, if you're watching this on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button down below. I've got a whole season of these conversations lined up, and trust me, you're going to want to see who's coming next. So let's start with you, Grace, because since we last spoke, because this is your second time on the podcast, you've been influential in the new MAMDANI administration. You were part of the transition and you had a role in the childcare proposal that apparently it's going to become a reality over the next few years. Tell us how that experience was.
It's been an amazing experience. I mean, really, like the rest of you, I spent most of my career as a political reporter. And so to be kind of putting on an advocacy hat and going deep on childcare as an issue of importance to New York. And then in really an incredibly short time, just sort of 2 years since we issued our first major report on childcare policy in New York City, we are seeing a historic investment commitment from the governor in partnership with the new mayor to put us on a path to universal childcare in New York City. And it is a powerful acknowledgement of the work that myself, the team at the Five Borough Institute, now at Citizens Union, and so many other advocates and parents and business leaders across the city have been undertaking to make sure that we are delivering for families and frankly, delivering for our economy as a whole by expanding our childcare infrastructure and making it much more affordable and accessible. So it's really exciting. And I mean, the fact that big announcement by the governor and mayor was made on, I think it was day 8 of the mayor's tenure at City Hall, I thought just to me bodes very well for the relationship that is already being developed between the mayor and the governor. All of us, I think on our podcast, spent a lot of time talking about the highly dysfunctional relationship between Mayor de Blasio and Governor Cuomo. And so it seems like a very new day has arrived in New York in terms of the level of cooperation, communication. That bodes well for the city as a whole.
And Zack, fairly or unfairly, the off-topic on politics listeners thought that you were the conservative voice on that podcast. So I'm wondering, how do you feel about having a Democratic socialist as mayor of New York City?
Yeah, no, I somehow got painted into the MAGA corner. I think this was, just as all that was coming up. No, I having been in Albany for these past over a decade more, I'm still in Albany now, just in a different capacity as a lobbyist and a communications person working with clients, but, had a lot of dealings with the current mayor, dealt with him both as a reporter and in this capacity. He's an extraordinarily charming individual who I happen to like a lot. And I think it's a really interesting situation. He's in the driver's seat. He's going to have to govern. I think so far so good. I mean, I think it's very early in the process. But look, certainly the previous administration had its shortcomings and failures. It was tried and it came up very short. I think there was a lot of disappointment coming out of the Adams administration, just in terms of how it was all set up. And, people have confided to me that it felt like there were a number of people in the Adams administration who were committed to doing the right thing and serving New Yorkers. And then there was another team that was committed to covering up his mistakes and letting individuals feed at the trough and, fueling corruption. And that doesn't work. And it didn't work, and he got himself in a lot of trouble. And I think it's unfortunate that it took him that long to realize. So a new approach, a fresh set of eyes, a different way of governing, I think is very welcome. And call it whatever you want. I mean, at the end of the day, socialism, which is a dirty word in this country, is not in most. They believe in free healthcare. If you believe in education, I mean, those are tenets of socialism. So I think whatever we want to put as a label on it, as long as it works and delivers and he can govern for New Yorkers, I think it's great.
And Grace, so you spent many years covering City Hall and the de Blasio administration for the most part. And do you have a feeling, while being in the transition of the Mamdani administration, that the people coming into government now know what they're doing?
Yes. I mean, definitely. And I think that some of the early hires by the mayor have signaled that they do value people with some deep and real governing experience. So Dean Foulahan is a classic example who has been brought in as first deputy mayor, senior leader in the de Blasio administration, as well as someone who's spent much of their career up in Albany. So this is someone who very intimately knows the levers of government, how to get things done, both at the city and state level. But that deep expertise is being combined with some much younger leadership that may have, I don't want to say less experience, but different experience. So the mayor's chief of staff, who was with him in Albany, again, new to city government, but brings obviously a deep reservoir of trust and understanding of how the mayor works, wants to run this administration. And I think it's really exciting that there are a number of young leaders that are being brought in. I'll just give a shout out to Emmy Liss, who worked with us at Five Borough for the last 2 years as our childcare policy advisor. And she has been appointed to run the mayor's office of childcare. She is a fantastic young leader, younger than the three of us. Not young necessarily compared to the mayor, but, a young leader who also is a veteran of the de Blasio administration, helped get universal pre-K off the ground and executed. And she's bringing that expertise into government at a senior level. And I think it's inspiring to see, we all have some years on Mayor Mamdani, but it's very inspiring to see younger New Yorkers who are both being put in leadership positions and are engaging with the city civically and politically in a way that we haven't seen. And it's exciting. These people want New York to work for them. They want to improve the city, and they're showing up to do the work.
And Zack, you interacted with now the Mayor Mamdani when he was up in Albany. Can you tell us a little bit about how those interactions were, and what's the idea that other legislators in Albany have of the new mayor after having worked with him for a few years when he was an assembly member?
Well, let me just say quickly on what Grace was saying, because I think it's a really interesting point. A lot was made about experience coming into this, and who is ever having experience of being the mayor until you're the mayor? I mean, you can't possibly get experience at that job without actually doing it. It's the second hardest job in America. And I know, in Cuomo supporters in the previous election would make that case, and they'd say, well, Cuomo has experience, and we need experience. Well, okay, what did his experience get him? He's sparring with the mayor during a pandemic about delivering resources, and he's writing a book about how successful he was before the pandemic's even over. So, experience matters if it's done responsibly and well. Sometimes experience, if it's done incorrectly or you're steering the ship in the wrong direction, it's actually a liability. So to the whole point you're making, Grace, which I think is a really good one, which is a fresh set of eyes, new ideas, that's important. And you need that in government. It's why I believe in term limits. I don't think anybody should be in office for 3 or 4 terms.
I think one other point to make is there are new people coming into government, but this is not like we see a lot of familiar faces in this administration. This is not sort of a whole
No,
cohort of
you're right.
newcomers.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. Jessica Tisch, who's the police commissioner, someone who is highly respected, worked for Mayor Adams, is being kept in her position.
Do you think she's going to last?
So I think she will last for some period of time. I don't know that. I mean, who knows what the future holds? But I think there are a lot of New Yorkers who want her to last, and I frankly think the mayor is one of them, because they both need each other. And there are a lot of New Yorkers who are, I believe, telling her, we want you to stay. We need your leadership. And frankly, none of Mayor Mamdani's policy agenda, I shouldn't say none of it works without public safety, but it becomes public safety is like the table stakes for getting anything done in New York City. If people do not feel safe in the city, if crime starts to spike, get out of control, that becomes like priority 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that will take his time and attention. And so we all need the police department to be successful and for the city to remain safe. So it's an interesting relationship and dynamic that's underway. But I do think of her as sort of like a quintessential public servant. And this is someone who wants to serve the public. And she's not sort of here based on some kind of ideological mind meld with whomever is in office at City Hall.
And Mamdani is going to need a lot of help and a lot of say from Albany for all those ideas that he wants to implement. So, Zack, do you think that relationship between Mamdani and Governor Hochul right now, pretty good relationship, and Mamdani and his former colleagues in the legislature, do you think that's going to stay, or is there already talk in Albany that Mamdani is not going to get most of the things he wants because he's not going to get the funding from the state government?
It's a really open question. I think, to the fact that he's now working with the governor to deliver on childcare, that's an area where they have common ground. Mamdani's got to come back with at least one pretty big win, which is something he campaigned on. I think some of the other promises he made, free buses, for example, I don't think that's likely to happen this session. I also think that assuming Hochul is reelected, she's going to have a lot more ability to maneuver and work with him in the future. I mean, she's going into a reelection where she needs the suburbs. Mamdani is very unpopular, I would say, in some of the suburbs of New York. They don't like the word socialist. They're skeptical. He has a lot to prove, and there are some of his ideas that people in the suburbs don't like. So Hochul's got to walk a very fine line there. So I think if she delivers one of those action items, they can both claim victory and go home, which is something that de Blasio was kind of unable to do with Cuomo, right? Remember, it was very similar. De Blasio's coming in his first year, is 2014. He's going on and on about how they need a tax to fund universal pre-K. Cuomo says to him, okay, I'm going to deliver this for you. I'm going to get you the money so you can deliver on your signature program that you promoted during the campaign. We're not doing a tax. And that sort of led to their big clash over those 8 years, was because Cuomo was saying, hey, I'm about to go into my reelection when I'm going to need the suburbs. They don't like the word tax, so let's stay away from that. I'm going to get you the money for it. But de Blasio kept insisting there needed to be a tax. And there's a similar debate going on now about tax the rich, tax the rich. The progressives, it's almost like a mantra. They say it over and over again. And I remember several years ago, I was talking to someone who was representing DSA and Working Families Party, and it was right around the pandemic when they did actually raise taxes on the very wealthy in New York, and it was New York City residents specifically. And they kept saying tax the rich, and I remember saying, okay, let's revisit this conversation in about a year, because it often becomes a rallying cry, but the money, where does it go? It goes into the general fund, right? Which is a black hole with a lack of accountability. I mean, it's not like when you're saying tax the rich, it's not like that money is specifically earmarked, for example, a fund to build housing for the homeless, which I think in that case, you could say that's a great, thing to spend the money on. But in many cases, it's tax the rich for the sense of just taxing the rich. And if you're not going to hold that money accountable and find out where it goes and whether it markedly improves the lives of people you are advocating for, then it might be something to rethink. So I think, in my point in all of this is that that's going to be an issue where there's going to be a clash, because I think the legislature is actually going to want to side with Mamdani on raising revenue on the very rich, and Hochul's not going to want to do that. So we'll see how forceful he is and whether he goes the route of de Blasio several years ago, where he wouldn't let it go.
At least so far, though, just to interject, I think that's what made that joint announcement on childcare so powerful and made it stand out to me, because I think Mayor Mamdani sort of walked that political tightrope incredibly well for the benefit of New York, right? So he clearly made the decision, we are going to set aside the conversation about taxes this year. We are not going to be publicly pushing the governor on it, except maybe in like a pretty mild way. And we are going to take this win and celebrate it for the win that it is. You know, that to me said a lot about kind of the importance of the ends versus the means, at least so far.
And what was your role in the whole childcare thing, Grace?
So I, both as a sort of policy thought leader and advocate. So I was part of the mayor's transition committee on the, they had one subcommittee that was focused on childcare and education. So I was part of that group. We have been surfacing ideas. Frankly, it's thrilling that the co-author of our childcare report is now driving childcare policy for City Hall, because all of the ideas that we put on the table 2 years ago are ones that she and I came up with together and co-authored that paper. So they are very much in play and on the table. And then we have been doing a lot of work over the last 2 years to engage the business community in conversations about childcare policies. And I think that's important because we have been sort of building a coalition of supporters from the private sector and from the business world in New York who fundamentally have been at the table saying childcare is economic infrastructure. These are important public investments for our economy. And we held a major summit in the fall at NYC'S headquarters in Brooklyn. And the governor spoke at it. The CEO of Etsy spoke at it. We had senior leaders from Tech NYC, from Accenture, from Synchrony, Deloitte. We had a lot of sort of big employers and companies that were represented there. And it showed that there was a real groundswell of support from within the business community for going big on childcare. And I believe that was very helpful for the governor to see that. This has been this level of historic investment that she's committed to making, obviously still needs to be approved as part of the budget deal, but this is a big step. She is increasingly, seems like, is willing to take some bigger policy swings than she has before. And a lot of that is because of sort of the politics and Mamdani's win, but it bodes well for New York. The public is, especially on the affordability front, is looking for some big changes to help them kind of make ends meet. And so I think it's important for our leaders to be ambitious in their policy goals.
8 years ago, we started Off Topic on Politics, that podcast. That it was the first New York One podcast.
Yep.
Now there are many more. They're really good, actually. Our listeners should go and check them out as well. And Off Topic on Politics is still running with some of our former colleagues. And we started the podcast at a time in which Governor Andrew Cuomo was running for re-election, his last re-election, because then we know what happened after the pandemic, that he had to resign. So, Zack, do you think Governor Kathy Hochul, who back then was running for lieutenant governor with Cuomo, do you think she has an easy win this year, since we also have this year a governor's race?
I think it's a lot easier now that Elise Stefanik is out of the race. The congresswoman from upstate New York was originally going to run. She was kind of a Trump acolyte. She wound up bowing out of the race, I think, when Trump kind of stabbed her in the back, frankly. I think on a couple of issues, I think, he had given her some sort of assurance that he would back her, and then kind of didn't talk Bruce Blakeman out of the race, who's the Nassau County executive, who actually won a big re-election. It was the one bright spot for Republicans in this very blue state last year. But I think Stefanik, who has a young child, was saying, if I can do this without a major Republican primary and go head to head with Hochul, that's one thing. And then I think she was also planning on running against Mamdani to a certain extent and linking Hochul to Mamdani. And, again, going back to that word socialist that scares people in certain parts of the state. And then Trump and Mamdani had this love fest at the White House. And I think, it kind of really threw her for a loop. And, the Republicans I've spoken to told me that she felt very betrayed by all of it and was just like, something good, go with Bruce Blakeman, guys. So I think the race is a lot easier. I don't think Stefanik necessarily would have beaten Hochul, but I think it would have been a more spirited race. I think people would have been more engaged. I think she does rally the base much more so than someone like Blakeman does. We've had these kind of challenges to Democratic incumbents in the past from kind of middle of the road Republicans who don't ignite the conservative base, and they fared very poorly. Rob Astorino, Mark Molinaro, nice guys, middle of the road, very tough to win in a very blue state, particularly with Trump in the White House. So I think, there's a backlash vote against Trump automatically. The state is overwhelmingly Democratic in terms of registration. So it makes it very challenging for a Republican. And then you have one that maybe doesn't excite the kind of MAGA and the conservative party aligned people. It's going to be, I think, a pretty easy race for her. Obviously, we have 10 months or whatever it is. That's an eternity in politics. There can be any kind of twists and turns between now and then. But on paper, right now, I think she glides to re-election, to be honest with you.
She has a primary first. Her lieutenant governor, Antonio Delgado, is running in the primary, Democratic primary in June. At least he's running for now. I interviewed him for this podcast a few months ago. Do you think he has a chance at all?
Personally, don't. No. Think that, she's working with Mamdani. He's basically given the indication, at least to his supporters, that he wants to work with this administration, with Governor Hochul. I don't know that Delgado has made a good case, number one, to the progressive base who would have to come out for him in big numbers. But then remember, it's not New York City. It's the suburbs. It's Western New York. It's upstate New York. It's tough to make that appeal. She really has, Governor Hochul, an enormous appeal beyond New York City. So he would not only have to really bring New York City people, out to vote for him, he would also have to get people beyond New York City. And I think that's very difficult for him. And I know that party leaders have spoken to him and told him this is an ill-advised move on his part. And he's stayed in the race. Again, he could catch fire. Something could happen. There could be a colossal mistake on the part of Hochul. But I think at this point, it's going to be a very uphill challenge for him.
So it's going to be a year full of politics with the governor's race, first year of the Mamdani administration. Is there anything that you're hoping or expecting this year? Anything that you're excited about when it comes to the political world?
I mean, I'm excited about the childcare work, which I think, when New York goes big on public policy, the rest of the country and the world take notice. And we have a chance here on the childcare front to do something incredibly big. The Mamdani administration has said it is going to start rolling out childcare for 2-year-olds starting this fall, and that in 4 years, by the end of his first term, it will be a universal system for 2-year-olds. So that's huge. That is really, really exciting. I want to stay optimistic, but I also, all of this, I feel like New York nationally is this bright spot when it comes to kind of public policy, what is happening here, all of the energy and excitement around a new mayor, working really well with our governor, taking some big policy swings. And then you zoom out and the national picture with immigration enforcement and ICE and what's happening in Minnesota is so horrific and demoralizing. And that is in my view, the danger that is looming possibly for us in New York. And that's sort of the big question mark. If Trump decides to really unleash sort of full ICE immigration enforcement here, we're looking at some very ugly, painful weeks, months more in New York City. So right now, I feel like I talk to all these people who say, oh my gosh, what's happening in New York on childcare is like the one bright spot nationally that's underway, and how exciting. But, when we pull back, the picture isn't pretty right now.
Zack, anything you're looking forward to?
I just think it's really interesting to see Mamdani in this position, and the progressives and the rise of the democratic socialists in this city, have been looking to get more and more public offices, occupy more public offices. They've been very good at doing that and expanding, their reach. And now they have the big prize. They have a guy who's the mayor. I guess the question, can they govern? They're going to try and approach things differently than has been done in the past. You're going to have to strike a balance between catering to kind of the ideology of progressives and DSA while also governing. And, look, governing New York City is a pretty non-idealistic job when it comes down to it. I mean, you're basically a manager, right? You got to make sure the trash gets picked up. The cops and the EMS have to show up on time. It's a lot of nonpartisan governing, and you got to strike a balance. I would argue even the governor's office, you can really govern much more on public policy than you can with being New York City mayor, which is a very demanding day-to-day, make things function kind of job. So that push and pull is something I'm going to be watching very closely. Does he feel as he needs to do something more to cater to that base? Is he afraid he's going to lose that base? Are they going to abandon him if he doesn't do enough of it? It's a tricky balance for him, and I wish him luck.
And how do you guys feel about the state of the country with President Trump in the White House? Do you guys feel okay? Do you guys feel shocked, enraged?
I feel like I had numerous conversations with people heading into the 2024 election where I said, this is not going to go well, guys. I don't know, where you are politically, whether you voted, however you voted in the past, but I Trump struck me on the campaign trail as about to engage on a revenge tour once he got into office if he were elected. To me, that has been precisely the playbook. And I think, to Grace's point, that's just one aspect, the ICE enforcement, that has been very ugly. But I can point you to 1,000 more that have been more than disappointing, have just been really upsetting, I think.
To say the obvious, President Trump and the way he has been leading this country, he's sort of broken any and all number of democratic norms, not to mention laws. And we are seeing, frankly, like military forces turned against Americans in a way that, frankly, to me has been unimaginable to see all of this play out. And I think it's horrific. I think this is not to diminish sort of the federal interference locally in New York, which has certainly existed, both in terms of, getting the Justice Department to drop corruption charges against our former mayor, but in immigration enforcement here locally, threats and indeed sort of cutting major sources of federal funding for New York just purely because we're a blue state. I mean, this is quite dangerous territory and nationally, but it will play out here locally. The midterm elections are coming up this year and are going to be hugely consequential in terms of our ability as a country to have fair, open, credible elections where the results are acknowledged and accepted by the folks who come up short. And that is going to be a big test. And it is, certainly at Citizens Union, these are issues that we work on and have worked on for 128 years, but they have such great importance right now in a way that, again, feels sort of unimaginable, that we're at a moment in our country's history where we are having, very serious conversations about kind of how to make sure our elections are executed fairly, properly, and that there is agreement on the results.
Because we're not talking about Republican politics or Democratic politics. We're talking about a change in the system, in the way we govern ourselves, much less democratic than we were used to, and even verging in the autocratic rule and the change in the world order that Trump is basically pushing forward.
I will say I'm not surprised that this is happening, okay? I think that, if you look at the history of human beings, we are one of the few beacons of democracy and sort of, a government system where the public actually has a voice. And every dictatorship, I mean, that was pretty much the norm going back throughout all human civilization. So I'm not totally surprised that we're veering back towards authoritarianism. People forget their history. They're somehow attracted to that. They want someone to kind of tell them what to do. But if you look at in many of these instances, when you saw the rise of a dictator, and I'm not saying Trump is on par with some of the worst ones at all, but there are very similar experiences taking place here. I mean, eroding trust in public institutions, telling people that the press has no credibility, eroding trust in the press. These are very dangerous places to go, and democracy is very fragile. And I just think that, once it's gone, people are going to be very upset. And I don't think we're that far away from losing it, frankly. Should there be more people out protesting this? Probably, but it's kind of the metaphor with the frog in the boiling water. Like, they don't realize it until it's really bad, and then it's too late. These things rarely happen with the snap of the finger overnight. They are slowly eroded, and people don't know what to believe anymore. So they follow, the lead of someone who's telling them it's everybody else's fault and not yours. It's a frightening thing to watch. I'm very disturbed by it. I hope that our institutions are strong enough to stand up to it, the courts, et cetera. And hopefully the change in parties at the midterms that Grace referenced actually takes place to a certain extent, so you have some checks and balances restored. But right now, it feels like a free-for-all. It feels like he's been given carte blanche to do whatever he wants. And he's doing it.
The role of journalism and the media in all of this, Juan, when I visited your class, I think it was sort of right after around CBS settled its lawsuit with Donald Trump over editing their interview with Kamala Harris for a 60 Minutes piece. And there have just been some, to me, gutting examples. Now it feels very not normal in a good way, but it's like now there are more and more. And so it feels like, oh, this is just the president's going to sue all these media organizations and they are going to capitulate and settle with him. And we are all aware of kind of the corporate ownership of these major media companies and bigger business deals that are taking place or attempting to take place, and how that is trickling down and shaping press coverage. And again, fuels just more distrust in these institutions that all of us, I think the three of us in particular, I can think early in our careers would look to as these kind of like arbiters of truth and bravery and storytelling. And, now, frankly, they are a part of this larger corporate machine, and sort of independent journalism is happening more and more in nonprofit news outlets and ones that are, or independent reporters who have, sort of struck out on their own through Substack and otherwise to write. So it's been a really difficult time for the press and for the media.
And fueled, I think, by AI and by social media, which have siloed off. It's like, everybody used to lament the old days. Well, there were only 3 television networks, and that's where you got all your news from, and a couple newspapers. And now it's much broader. Well, that's not necessarily much better. People live in their own realities. They see their feeds and they tell them what they reinforce what they already think that they know. And sometimes that's completely false. It just seems like, coming out of the pandemic, it made us as Americans very divided for a lot of reasons, including that's really when I feel like we went off the rails in terms of having 2 separate realities. And you juxtapose that with something like 9/11, which we all lived through in this city, where people really came together. I very much opposed what George W. Bush did in terms of waging wars in foreign countries after that. But initially, at least, there was a sense that we all belong to the same country and that we're all united in that. Now, I don't know. I don't feel the same shared sense of purpose. And I think, Trump has taken advantage of the social media and some of these other instruments to divide us further.
I don't want to end on a somber note, but anything that you guys missed about being a reporter, a journalist? Grace, is there anything right now that you feel like I wish I was still covering the city, or you never have those thoughts?
I have those thoughts. I definitely have those thoughts. It's the greatest job ever to be a political reporter in New York. I will say that on primary night, during the mayoral primary, I was watching NY1 from home, and I was just like, God, I want to be out there. I want to be, at a campaign watch party, or really you want to be at a campaign watch party, like reporting back in with dispatches. And I did get to scratch that itch on the election night. Our friend Danny Manarino at Pix 11, they did live coverage of election night for the mayor, and I was part of a panel that was on for several hours that evening. And I was like, oh, thank goodness. Thank goodness I can be part of the live conversation. There, those big moments where everyone is watching in the city, everyone is sort of engaged in the same conversation about the future of New York. There's nothing more fun than being like right in the middle of it. And so those are times where I do really, really miss it.
Zach?
I don't miss it at all, to be honest. It was great. I loved it. See you later. When I was done, I was done. And I've done a little punditry and analysis too, Grace, and it was fun. But I feel like it's very different than really being in it, and being the reporter.
Oh, totally.
I wouldn't rule that out doing that in the future, but I honestly had the opposite reaction as I'm watching the primary, and I was like, I'm so glad I am sitting here on my couch and not out in the field doing that. God bless them; they're doing great. But it was time to pass the torch. Time to do something else.
And is there anything that you can do now that you couldn't do when you were working as a journalist, as a reporter?
Yeah, really be an advocate for issues that you care about. So, there's no universe in which I could have been kind of championing an expansion of our childcare system, which is, as a mother of two kids who are now 11 and 14, so don't need childcare themselves in the same way. But this is something I've cared about for a very long time, and to be able to be part of a broader coalition of New Yorkers fighting for change that I think will benefit so many more families for generations to come is incredible. And so that is something that I couldn't have done in my role as a reporter.
Yeah,
Zach?
I'm helping to raise money for politicians who I'm friendly with and who I know. That's something that you could never do before. So it's very interesting just being on the other side, right? Like being in Albany, where I covered as a reporter, and I was constantly locked out of the discussion because they're always trying to keep things from the press. Now I'm kind of in that room, a little bit more. I'm not where the real decisions are made, but I'm on the other side of it. People aren't afraid to tell me things at times. They're not trying to keep it from. It's just a very different angle to view Albany from, which is fascinating, because for so many years I covered it as a reporter, and your job is to find out what's going on up there, and it's still an opaque place, and it's still hard to find out what's going on. But there's less of a concerted effort to conceal it from me, I think, now that I'm not on the press.
Is there anything that you would recommend right now when it comes to a museum, an activity in the city, something that you recently discovered, or a book that you're really into right now that you think friends and family members should read?
So I did go to an exhibit at the Museum of the City of New York. This is admittedly several months ago. I don't know that it's still there, but they had in one of these rooms, it had kind of a music from across the 5 boroughs. And when you'd step on the borough of Queens, a new song would come up from a Queens artist from over the years. It was really, really good. You go to the Bronx, there was like hip hop. You would go to Manhattan, they'd have old jazz standards. But it was diverse in terms of but it was really well done. The kids were doing it. Some probably not familiar with a lot of the songs that were coming up. I was doing it. I'm an adult, and I thought it was fascinating. So that was really good.
Is it a safe space here, guys? Is this a safe
For
space?
sure.
Okay, because I have to confess something. I'm not sure if this is a good idea or not. Okay. Hold on one second.
I'm scared.
I am reading.
Oh
and
my God.
I have never read it. Okay. Which feels like my secret shame. And I've been in the closet for too long as someone who has not read The Power Broker. And I frankly was inspired to come out of the closet because I think MAMDANI, maybe on FAQ NYC, admitted that he has not read The Power Broker. And that then gave me the permission to say, I too have not read it. And so one of my New Year's resolutions was, I was like, enough already. I'm reading it. It is fabulous. It is dense, but it is fabulous. And like, it's what a story. I'm not, I don't know, a quarter of the way in. Long way to go, but just like a fascinating story of Bob Moses.
Don't feel bad. Don't feel bad, Grace. I have it back here. I think I've read 25% of it, but I haven't finished it.
Okay, so Zack, this is our time to confess.
Took me a full summer, but I did read it many years back. Yeah, it is dense, to your point, but and some of it I would have said, okay, I don't know that this totally needs to be in there, but it was a fascinating read. And if you want to study and be active in New York City politics, it's kind of a must read. Like, it's just it's a great lesson in how things get done and the power dynamics of New York State. New York City.
Totally.
Zack Fink, Grace Rauh, thank you so much. That was fun. We should do it again soon.
That was great. Thanks for having us.
That was great. So good to see you guys.
So that's it for this episode of the Juan Manuel Benítez Wants to Know podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit that button right below the video. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leave a rating and a review, because that's going to help others to find the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. From New York City, Juan Manuel Benítez.